Okay, so what we'd like to do this evening is to talk about a topic that is a bit nebulous. Admittedly, there's some gray area. We did a lot of these sources in our Choshen Mishpat Shiur, and I did write up a piece a couple of weeks ago in the bulletin in the Choshen Mishpat corner about the specific issue of when you have more than one shadchan, how do you break down the fees? But I just wanted to trace with you the sources of shadchanas that appear in the Shulchan Aruch. There are, besides just the generic idea of a shadchan being discussed in Even HaEzer very briefly, it basically says, we refer you to Choshen Mishpat to see the discussion of shadchanas, of how you handle a shadchan. And there are three places in the Shulchan Aruch where it's only the Ramah who discusses the issue of shadchanas. And so I know that, quite interestingly, in the Sephardic communities, generally people don't take payment for shadchanas. And it could be that it traces its way back to back hundreds of years, where the concept of shadchanas is discussed, but mostly by the Ramah, and we don't find the Mechaber talking about shadchanas at all as far as payment. But the Ramah does discuss it, and the Ramah puts it in the same category of sarsirus, which means brokerage. And you find that whenever the Shulchan Aruch talks about brokerage, the Ramah invariably inserts an addendum about how to handle a shadchan, because a shadchan is viewed by the poskim, going back to the times of the Rishonim, as a broker. And so the three places where you will find the Ramah talking about shadchanus as a payment to a broker, we'll just go through those three places very briefly. And source number one is in Hilchos Toin V'Nitan, which is all about the laws of claims. If I claim you owe me $100 and you deny that claim entirely, you're what's called a kofar bakol. You completely deny the claim. What is the din of a kofar bakol? Person who completely denies a claim. What? Yes. The ikar din of the Gemara is that he's completely pater, and the Chachamim in later generations imposed what's called the Shvuas Heses, a rabbinic shvua. But that's only where the Chachamim feel that there's a drora de mamona, where the Chachamim feel that there's some kind of prior financial connection between the claimant and between the plaintiff and the defendant. There are times when the Chachamim will not impose a shvua at all, and basically say that there's absolutely no connection. It's like if I go and I go through the white pages of the New York City, I'm dating myself, there's no more white pages, right? If they existed, and I find a guy named Goldberg in Borough Park, and I take him, I send him a hazmana to Beis Din, and we've never met each other, there's really no possible financial connection between the two of us. So then there, the Beis Din would not impose a shvua. Today, Batei Din do not impose shvuas at all, even though the normal din is that you do impose a shvua. So this is where Rav Moshe has a tshuva, which I didn't print for you today, where he says that sometimes the Beis Din will, if they see that there's a claim and there's a full denial of the claim, and normally we would make the defendant take a shvua that he doesn't owe the money. However, in the absence of a shvua, they may ask, or they may compel or rule that the defendant has to pay a third of the claim. But that too is subjective. It will all depend upon whether they feel that there's any mamashus, any substance to the claim. So today, if a person were to make a claim and the other person would be kofar bakol, the Beis Din could either say you owe nothing, they could say you owe a third, or they could come up with their own amount. Based on that, so the Shulchan Aruch says, Yesh mi sha'omer, sha'hamazkir shem shamayim levatola shekenegdo nishba v'notel, that if the defendant is a person who regularly takes God's name in vain, and therefore does not have ne'emanus to take a shvuah faithfully, because he doesn't care whether he swears falsely or not, because God's name is irrelevant to him. He doesn't have the reverence that he's supposed to have. So then, shekenegdo nishba v'notel. So then in that situation, the plaintiff would take the shvuah instead, and he would do the collecting based on that shvuah of his claim. And here the Ramah adds an addendum. And he writes, Tiva'o bischara shadchanus, v'zeh koifer va'omar shelo haya shadchan shelo. Let's say I make a shidduch, and the shadchan says, you owe me shadchanis geld. You owe me for the brokerage of the shadchanis. And I say, I don't know what you're talking about. I never used you as a shadchan. I knew the boy, or I knew the girl independently of you. I appreciate the fact that you may have recommended this shidduch, but you had nothing to do with it whatsoever. O sha'ar ta'anos shebeinayu, or there are other claims that are between the two parties. Dino kebishar tivios mamon v'nishboin al kach. This is no different from any other kind of financial dispute, and you treat it as such where the defendant has to take a shvuah. So if a shadchan comes to me and takes me to Beis Din and says, I'm owed my shadchanis fee, so this is taken seriously by the Beis Din. It's not that the person can just say, I never used you as a shadchan before. The Beis Din might impose a shvuah on the defendant, and in the absence of shvuahs bisman hazeh, in the last couple of centuries, the Beis Din might actually compel, if they feel that there's substance to the claim, they might compel the defendant to pay a certain percentage of the claim. Okay, that's the first part, first place in Shulchan Aruch. Second place in Shulchan Aruch is Sirsur, is the laws of Sirsurus, which is laws of brokerages. Okay, a person is a broker if, let's say, he finds a house for you, just like a real estate broker. A real estate broker is entitled to his brokerage fee. If you try to cut out a broker out of his brokerage fee, then not only in secular law, but in Shulchan Aruch, that's a form of theft, and the broker can take you to court. Sirsur shenosan kli levakro, v'lo ratza hamivaker lahachziro. Let's say an agent is trying to broker a deal. Let's say he's trying to sell a car. And so he is brokering a car, and the seller allows the buyer to take it for a test drive. V'lo ratza hamivaker lahachziro. And the buyer refuses to return the car. Just giving you an example. Or the utensil, whatever it is. So chayev hasirs, or the broker, is now chayev, because the broker, when he offered to represent the buyer, takes the responsibility of making sure that the object that is being tested will be returned complete. The kol shekain she'en l'sirs or limkor chayfetz ba'ashrai, ela im kein notol rishus mi bal hakli. And it goes without saying that an agent should not sell something with an extension of credit unless, in other words, to give something away and have the balance owed to the seller, unless he gets permission from the seller. Like you can't say, oh, I'll sell it to Plony. Plony can't pay for it now, but he'll pay for it in the next 6 months. You can't do that unless you get permission from the seller. So that's completely has nothing to do with shidduchim. It's a purely financial halacha. Comes along the Ramah, and he says emphatically, Hashadchan havi kemo sirsur. A shadchan is no different from any other kind of broker. V'im hashadchan rotzeh sheyishalmu lo miyad schar shadchanus, v'haba'olim enam rotzim l'shalim ad hanisuin. If the shadchan wishes to be paid for his shadchanus immediately, as soon as the engagement takes place, and the two families, because usually, as we'll see, usually the custom is that the two families share in the Shadchanas payment, okay? And the families do not wish to pay immediately. They say, we'll pay you at the wedding. That's where we're going to bring big wads of cash to pay the caterer and to pay the florist and to pay the band, and we'll pay the shadchan then. Or maybe they just want to hedge their bets, just in case they're fearful that maybe the engagement will last. So toloi b'minhag hamedina. This depends on the prevailing minhag. Uv'makom she'ein minhag hadin im ha'ba'olim. When there is no minhag, so then the balabatim have the upper hand because there's no prevailing minhag, and therefore they can say, you feel you're entitled to get it once the engagement took place. We don't want to pay until the wedding, and that's within their right. If, however, there's a prevailing minhag, and we'll see that a lot of these halachas of shadchanas follow the minhag. I was listening and just trying to prepare for this last night. I was listening to Headlines, the podcast with David Lichtenstein. So, any relation? Oh, okay. So, back in 2017, he had a guest on who had written an English book called Halachos of Shadchanas. And the fellow was discussing what the minhagim are in Lakewood today, currently. And he was explaining that in Lakewood, the minimum that each side must pay for Shadchanas is $1,000 from each side. That's the minimum. And he pointed out that sometimes if the families are of greater means, there's an expectation to pay more. But he said it's never less than $1,000. So that was back in 2017, and it was US dollars. I don't know what the standards are for our community. I would submit to you that standards may differ between a shidduch that's made in Thornhill versus a shidduch that's made down south. I don't know. I actually honestly don't know has anyone been involved in paying shadchanim? No.
Sister in routine. She has friends who are when she was in routine, she said, again, it depends on the family, so it could be easily 3 to 5 grand.
Yeah. Is that each side or both sides together? Okay. All right. So anyway, but this is now one of the things that we're going to investigate is there's a shaila that is brought in our sefer that we're learning in Choshen Mishpat, the sefer Baruch Omer, where he deals with the question: is a non-professional shadchan owed shadchanas? And the conclusion is yes. A broker who brokers a deal for you, they don't have to be doing this professionally in order to be entitled for their services. Just like any other kind of brokerage. If I want to get the paperwork, I don't have to be a licensed broker in order to be able to sell a house. I may not be able to collect, let's say, certain fees that the law entitles a licensed broker, but I can certainly make a contract with anyone that I wish to that entitles me to a certain percentage of whatever the purchase is. So that's another thing. Does it have to be stipulated up front? Again, it's toloi in the minhag. If the minhag is to pay shadchanas, so then it doesn't have to be stipulated up front. But if there's no prevailing minhag in the community for shadchanas, so then it could be that it has to be stipulated, especially if the shadchan has an expectation of getting more than what the going rate is. I understand. Even if he's not a professional shadchan, he's owed shadchanas based on the standards of the community. Now, he says, "Uvemakom she'ein tzarich l'shalim lo ad hanisuin." He says, in situations where it's not necessary for the families to pay until the actual wedding, im chazru bohen v'nispatel hashadchanus piturim haba'olim milashalim lo scharo. So if for whatever reason the deal is backed out, the engagement is broken, so then the families do not have to pay the shadchanas geld. Ele im kein hisnu behedja al manas sheyit payes, Va'az tzarech l'shalim lo miyad afilu yachzeru bahen. Unless there was a condition made with the Shadchan explicitly, al menas sheyit payes, that if the engagement is broken, they will still have to pay him at least a percentage of his brokerage fee. Then va'az tzarech l'shalim lo miyad, and then once the engagement is broken, they have to pay him that amount immediately. Afilu yachzeru bahen, which is, in other words, if it was stipulated that even if the engagement is broken, I think that's what it means. Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
A non-professional.
Well, we're not dealing with that subject right now, but I'm happy
okay,
to take
okay.
the question. But I'd
Sure.
rather wait until we get to
Sure.
the tshuva.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Right. Now, let's go on to the third and final place where the idea of Shadchanis is mentioned by the Ramah in Shulchan Aruch, which is in Siman Reish Samech Dalid, Hilchos Aveda Umitzia. There is a halacha that states that you cannot exploit a person's desperate situation by overcharging them. V'chein mi shabarach mi beisa asurim v'haisa ma'avores lefanav v'amar le ha'avireni v'aninosin lecha dinar v'he'aviro ein lo eles charo haro'ilo. There are some times when a person is so desperate, a person just breaks out of jail and he's got to cross this river, and he tells a guy who's the toll taker, take me across. I'll give you a dinar, which is an exorbitant amount to pay a toll to cross the river. You only have to pay him, even though you promised him the moon, you only have to pay him what the regular toll fare is. V'im hayat sayad v'amar le batel mitzudatcha v'ha'avireni. If, however, the person standing by the river who can take him across is not a toll taker, but is rather a guy who's trying to catch some fish, and he says, and the guy who just broke out of jail says to him, Batel mitzudatcha va'avireni, stop whatever you're doing and get me across the river, because in those days you'd have to take, he was a ferryman, he would have to take you on his boat and take you to the other side. No sein lo kol ma shehisna imo v'chein kol kayotze bazeh. Then, because he's actually losing expense by taking you across the river, there is no fixed price because he's not a ferryman, not a regular ferryman. And therefore, whatever price you negotiate is what you have to pay, even though he exploits your desperation. Now,
Caught quite a big fish.
yeah, that's right. Now, yesh omrim ha de'en lo elischaro hainu bedavar she'en regilus litein alav harbe. He says, some say that the only time that a person is only entitled to their regular fee, no matter how desperate the person is only when it's not normal to pay exorbitant amounts for this kind of service. Aval bedavar shederach litein harbe kagon hashba'as shedim o refuah. But when people do pay very, very large sums of money to be able to acquire a certain service, which is like a very specialized service, like the second one is refuah, let's say going to a doctor. The doctor has a right to charge whatever he wants as his fee. But the first one is hashba'as shedim, which is the suppression of demons, that's a pretty good business if you can do it. I just saw a video clip. There's a very elderly rabbi in the Iranian community in LA. And they have a clip of him where someone's driving him around, and he went over to the fires in the Palisades, and he said a certain kapitel tehillim, and all of a sudden you see the wind blows the fire the other direction to keep the fire from traveling to the Jewish neighborhood. And you see, if you say this kapitel tehillim, you see he's a holy man, and you see, and then a lot of cynical responses to that whole thing. Like, why couldn't he get rid of all the fire then instead of just protecting the Jewish community? In any event, so chayav litein lo kol ma shehisna imo. Then according to Tosfos and the Rosh, you have to give him whatever the negotiated fee is if he's providing a specialty service. Uvishadchanus ein lo elis charo, afal pi shehisna imo lases lo harbe. Now with shadchanus, it's the same thing. Even though you promise a shadchan, you'll pay him an exorbitant amount to seal the deal on broker a deal on a shidduch. But if there's already a standard price, you only have to pay him the standard price. Now, there are exceptions to this rule as well, as the poskim speak out, that if you make a formal kinyan with the shadchan and you sign a contract, so then that supersedes this rule. But the general rule is that there are times when people out of desperation will make certain promises or guarantees to pay more than what the going rate is, thinking that because they're desperate, they're being held over the barrel. And the poskim basically say that these deals are not legally binding unless a formal kinyan is made. Let's go on. Now, in the siman that we saw before, siman Kuf Pei Hey, which talks about brokerage halacha, where the Ramah says beferish, shadchan havi kamosir sur. A shadchan is no different from any other broker. So there's a halacha earlier in that siman which says Ruven hayelo bayis limkor. If Ruven has a house that he wants to sell, uba Shimon the sirser l'machur l'levi, and Shimon steps forward and he wants to offer his services to sell the house. I will broker a deal and I will sell the house to Levi. Va'amar Ruvain shalevi sono ve'eno rotza limkar lo. And Ruvain says, you want to sell my house to Levi? Feh, I hate Levi's guts. There's no way I'm going to sell my house to Levi. So va'achar kain machro leLevi al yedei acher. And then 2 weeks later, Shimon discovers that Ruvain has sold his house to Levi using a different broker. Okay. Chayev litain l'Shimon sarsaruso. So Ruvain has to pay a brokerage fee, the normal brokerage fee he has to pay to Shimon. In other words, because he's cheated Shimon out of his brokerage fee, because he was the one who initially brought the deal to Ruvain to sell his house to Levi. If he Taka had refused to sell the house to Levi, so then Shimon would not be entitled to anything. But the fact that he later sold it to Levi behind Shimon's back means that he was trying to swindle Shimon out of his brokerage, and therefore Shimon can take him to Beis Din and get his full fee. Yes, Cyril.
So he used a different broker.
He used a different
So
broker.
they have to pay twice.
It would seem like he's got to pay twice. Yeah.
They don't
yeah.
share.
Correct. Correct. No, they don't share it. He's got to pay full fee to both parties. Now, if we take a look at the Pischei Tshuva, this is where he gets into details about when there are multiple Shadchanim based on this halacha that is described in the Ramah. That Ruvain treacherously sells the property to Levi using a different broker. So first of all, he says, as a matter of fact, you should know that the way that the Ramah quotes this halacha is not so pasha. Ayin b'tshuvas noda b'Yehuda tinyana siman lamed vav, shekasav de b'tshuvas harosh mekor haidina lo huzkar shemachar al yedei acher. That the noda b'Yehuda challenges the Ramah. He says, if you look at the original citation of this halacha, the original source, it's in the Rush. And the Rush does not say that Ruvain sold the property al yedei acher, the way that you just described it from the Ramah, but rather all it says is that Ruvain sold the property to Levi afterwards and cut Shimon out of the deal. Okay, so Rak Mavurisham Shemachro Achar Kach Levi al yedei atzmo. He just sold it himself. And that's a real treacherous thing to do, is like, you call up Levi because you know him from shul, and you say, Levi, I hear you want to buy my house. Shimon just came over to me and told me that he can broker the deal. What do we need Shimon for? We'll sign papers and we'll cut him out of the deal. Why should you have to pay an extra 5% fee on top of what I'm selling you the house for? Let's split the profit and the 5% that we're saving. I'll give you a 2.5% discount and I'll keep 2.5% and everyone will be happy and Shimon will be none the wiser. Okay? So that's the way the Rush describes the halacha in that case. And that's where the Rush says you have to pay Shimon his fee. Ume'ata masha hosif rama al yedei acher yesh ladun al zeh. So really it's a kasha on the Ramah. Why did he change the case? Why did he say that Ruvain later sold the property using a different broker? Why not say it the way the Rush had originally expressed it? The bishlama imachro achar kach lelevi beloshum sirsor, shaper muchach de beramos de chola sirsor. He says, in the Rush's, the way the Rush originated the case, it's clear that Reuven is acting deceitfully and just basically trying to cut Shimon out of his commission. Aval imachro achar kach al yedei sirsor acher, yuchal lihiyot shahasirsor hechadash, hitim lo te'amim nechonim shelo ya'akev hamecher avur hasina. But let's say in the case that the Ramah mentioned, maybe the reason why the Rush doesn't talk about that case is because maybe legitimately, let's say the second broker, we'll call him Yehuda for argument's sake. Yehuda, the second broker, may be exclusively entitled to the brokerage, and Shimon Taka isn't entitled. Why? Because when Shimon first came to Reuven to say, let's sell your house to Levi, he wants to buy your house, Reuven's initial reaction was, I hate Levi's guts. I can't stand the thought that he's going to go and live in my bedroom, right? He's going to make his bedroom my bedroom, right? No way. It's never going to happen. Yehuda calls him a couple weeks later and is a more persuasive type of speaker. And he says to him, Reuven, why get hot under the collar? First of all, Levi's not such a bad guy. Your assessment of him, he has charata for whatever he did to you in the past. He's done shuva. And second of all, does it really matter to you? It's gashmias. What do you care? And he's able to sweet talk Reuven and convince him that despite his animosity towards Levi, he should taka sell the house. And if you express the case in this way, it certainly would make sense why Yehuda is the one who earned the money, because he was able to close the deal, whereas Shimon, when he heard that Reuven says, I hate the guy's guts, there's no way he's getting my house, basically said, okay, I understand, sorry, and hung up the phone. And Yehuda wouldn't take no for an answer. So maybe there's a qualitative difference, which is why Yehuda should be entitled to the brokerage and not Shimon. Okay, V'al kol panim nireh, shegam Ramah shekasav shemocha yidei acher chayv litein l'Shimon sarsaruso, kavanaso kefi chelko. So he says, I believe, and this is, someone asked this question, was it that they split it? Does he have to pay double the brokerage fee? So he says the Noda Yehuda, I believe that the Ramah is not suggesting that he's got to pay the full brokerage to both Shimon and Yehuda, but he's got to pay a full brokerage fee, which is split between Shimon and Yehuda. Shelo Tomar, Kaven shemitchila lo nichnesu divrei hasirser ba'oznei hasocher shuv ein lo shum zechus, kamash malon shelo ibei zechuso, avol vadai shegam hasheni hu shutuf b'sar serus hazeh. The chiddush of the Ramah is that when Shimon first presented the deal, it could be that Reuven didn't want to hear of it. But when he got the second call from Yehuda, he said to himself, you know what? If Shimon and Yehuda are calling me, maybe I should try this out. It's like, when a person tries to open up the jar of pickles and he can't open it up, and he tries and he tries and he tries, and then someone else comes along and opens up, boop, and it just opens right away. So one of two things is possible. Either the first guy is an oisvarf and couldn't do it at all. He didn't contribute at all to the opening of the jar of pickles, or he loosened it a little bit so that the second guy was able to get it off much more easily. And so the way that the Ramah seems to be looking at it is that Shimon opened the deal. He sort of introduced the deal to Reuven. Reuven was not prepared to hear it, but by the time he got a second call from Yehuda, because Shimon had introduced it, and now Yehuda concludes it, the two of them together jointly are shaykh to the brokerage, and therefore they should split it. That's what the Noda Yehuda. That's how he understands the Ramah. V'im yiton hasirser harishon al hamocher shegam ba'oto pa'am hayita merutza udechitani lomar she'incha rotza limkar l'levi kidei lahafsideni. And maybe Shimon will have a claim, and he'll say to Reuven, no, I want the whole fee, because really the only reason why you didn't use me is because you wanted to use your brother-in-law, Yehuda, as the broker, and you just didn't want to pay me the commission, you wanted to pay Yehuda the commission instead. Ve'ata hichnasta b'zroat asir sur hasheni, ein b'koach taina zu afilu l'chayv et hamocher shavua al zeh. He says that's also a second chiddush of the Ramah, that the broker, the first broker, Shimon, does not have a valid claim. He can't make such a claim unless he has actual evidence. Let's say he has a recording of the telephone conversation where Reuven calls up Yehuda and says, Reuven, you're not going to believe what just happened. Shimon called me and he offered to sell my house to Levi. But I know you're a broker too. I'd much rather give you the commission than give it to Shimon, so I'm going to let you be the broker. If you have evidence like that, right, so then Shimon has a claim. But in the absence of that tape recording, in the absence of that evidence, Shimon is entitled to only half of the brokerage, and Yehuda is entitled to the other half because Reuven can say it had a cumulative effect. Okay. Okay. Kevin she'eno omer bazet tainas bari, because he doesn't have a definite claim. He's just conjecturing. The gam im haita hakavana beramos gam kein ani mesupak im chayv hamocher lahashel masir sarishon efsat shigaram lo v'yoter karov be'enai shapater ad kan devarav. And I'll go even further, says the Noda B'Yehuda. Even if Shimon can bring evidence that Reuven's objective was to cut Shimon out, he still can't claim full brokerage fee because Lamaisa, Yehuda did the work. And if Yehuda did a portion of the work to broker the deal, see, he's certainly entitled to a portion of the fee, and Shimon is entitled to the other portion. That's Azoi Zagt, the Noda B'Yehuda. The Kosav Od Sham. So then he says, let me quote you some more from the Noda B'Yehuda. He says, Bidvar Shadchan Shedacha Habal Diber. Let's see. Bidvar Shadchan Shedacha Habal Diber Oto Velakach Shadchan Acher Ligmor Hashidach. I'm not sure if I'm reading the words correctly. I'm sorry. Shedacha Habal Davar Oso. Okay.
Didn't want to speak to that.
Shadacha habal davar osa, and I think it's shadacha habal davar osa, because then it would be ito. So he says there's another case. Let's say a shadchan recommends a shidduch, and the father of the girl says, "Thank you, we'll look into it, or we're not interested. If I'm interested, I'll call you back." Okay. V'lakach shadchan acher ligmor hashidduch, and then the father calls up another shadchan to finalize the shidduch. Hadavar yadua shehefresh gadol yesh bein shiduch lemekach. So first of all, we have to point out, while it's true that the Ramah says that a shadchan is a broker, no different from selling real estate or cars or anything else like that, but we still have to admit that there is a very big difference between a shidduch and the sale of property. Why? Ki be'esek hamekach ein sham dvarim emtsoyim v'hamekach toli rak bedamim. He says, because when you're selling property, there's only one factor, the product and the price. That's it. Product and price. Okay? The keven shahasir serhevi otam le'emek hashaveh b'sach hadamim kvar nigmar hadavar v'lo chaser rak hakinyan. He says a broker who's able to arrive at a good price for the same property, he's done his job, and there's nothing more for him to negotiate. There's no more work for him to do. V'lachenim hamocher dechol lahasirsur bidvarim ve'achar kach ichnis od sirsur bazen nistapakti ktsas im ramos hazeh mechayev lahamocher l'shalom l'sirsur harishon hefsedo. He says, in that situation, if you can prove that in a case of a brokerage of a sale of, let's say, a property, that Reuven completely cut out Shimon deliberately, deceitfully, so that he could use his brother-in-law Yehuda as the broker, there's a possibility that we could say that he's got to pay the full brokerage to Shimon because he deliberately cut him out in order to cause him a loss of money. There he says, nistapakti. Aval b'shiduchim yesh harbe pratim levad sachanadan. He says, but with shiduchim, it's a completely different animal. There are many other considerations other than how much dowry is the yeshiva bacher going to get to let him learn in Kollel for a certain number of years, let's say. Kimo hischayvus mizonos v'dira uvegadim umatanos. There's a lot more that has to be negotiated on. There has to be a negotiation of how much of a stipend the young couple will receive, what kind of apartment they're going to live in, what kind of clothing they will be awarded at during their marriage, what kind of gifts they'll be entitled to keep, and so forth. V'kama pe'amim bishvil davar katan mitparedet hachavila v'nitbatel hashidduch. He says, and because of that, because there are so many other details that go into the consummation of a shidduch, it's a very delicate process. And not everyone has the same skill in sealing a deal, in making sure, in closing a deal. V'lachein kol zman shelo hishve otam hashadchan harishon b'chol hapratim ad shelo nishar shum davar gadol o katan shetzarach ledaber bazeh adayin lo nigmar hashidduch al yedei hashadchan. He says, and therefore, a shadchan may have made an introduction of a young man to a young lady, spoken to both of the families, but they've only spoken in generalities as far as things look good, we may want to move forward with this, yada, yada, yada. But there's a lot more that has to be negotiated. There are many, many more details that have to be worked out. And let's say the father of the girl says to himself, my friend Yankel, who has been working on the shidduch up until now, his skills as a negotiator are much more limited. I think I need the services of a guy who will do much better in being able to negotiate a good deal for my son or for my daughter, whatever the case may be. And therefore, v'im echad mehatzadim machnis es ohavo o krovo ligmor hadavar. And therefore, if one of the families decides, I'd like to get my friend to get involved, or my family member who's a better negotiator, who will be able to do a better job in order to seal this deal, afilu haya b'yichole shel hashadchan harishon lahashvosam gam ken b'protim halalu ein kan ramos klal. Even if the first shadchan can successfully argue that he would have been perfectly able to get the same terms agreed to, this is not deceit. The father of the bride or the groom who's bringing in another negotiator is not doing it in order to cut out the first shadchan. He's doing it because he sincerely believes that this is a very delicate process that requires more expertise and more finesse in order to get the best deal possible for my son or daughter. And therefore these things happen all the time. And therefore, there's no recrimination that the first shadchan can make against the family, the father of the boy or girl for choosing another shadchan. He says because he may have tainas, but there's no legal recriminations. Niralish kavanaso sheni yachol letovo klal chelak hagoymer, avol vade shetzarach l'shalim lo chelak hamagil l'masla kefi takvanas hamedina sham ad kan devarav ayin sham od. So that's the end of the quote from the Noda B'Yehuda as far as Shadchanas is concerned. And what the Pischei Tshuva just points out is what the Noda B'Yehuda means is that the first Shadchan cannot claim that he should be paid his full Shadchanas, and that whatever you pay the second Shadchan is above and beyond my full fee. No, he's entitled to get a percentage of the fee for bringing the shidduch to a certain point, everything according to the minhag hamadina, which has to be worked out. It has to be fleshed out what the minhag hamadina is. And that's what the Pischei Tshuva is going to discuss in a moment. But there's no legal claim. And just like the first shadchan will get a certain percentage, the second shadchan will get the remainder of the shadchana's fee. So let's say the shadchana's fee is $3,000, let's say in this particular case, and there's two shadchanim, the shadchan A and shadchan B, presumably they would split it. That's what we would think just by reading the words of the Noda B'Yehuda, right?
So you say that it's not serious at all. If this was a case of a house, and this was a real estate deal, would the Noda B'Yehuda say the same thing?
No, he's actually made that distinction quite explicit. But it's still a sirsurus. It's still a brokerage. A shadchan is still a broker. But he's
a house and same logical type of thing. You can close the deal, everything else, but
right.
You wouldn't apply that to a house.
You wouldn't apply for what's the svara? Because a house doesn't require the same finessing. Yeah. Right. That's the reason why. Okay. V'ayin bateres tzvi sifkatan yudzayin shekasav matzasi chasav bepinkas aratzas. The Ateres Tzvi must have lived either the 18th or 19th century, and he writes that I found written in some kind of notebook of what the standards are of the lands where Jews live, that in Poland or in Eastern Europe, the Hamaschil v'Hagomer yachloko b'neihem b'shava. That the minhag in these lands is that the opener and the closer, the first Shadchan and the last Shadchan, first and second, let's say, split the fee evenly among themselves. V'hamaschil no nikra, ela mi sha'omar kama ata nosein, perish yadaber odos nesinus, ve'emtzoi lo yikach klum. And what is a maschil, an opener? In our world, this really wouldn't happen because we don't negotiate, the Shadchan doesn't negotiate finances. Usually not. I don't think that happens in our world. But in the world where the Noda B'Yehuda and the Pischei Tshuva were coming from, the Shadchan wouldn't just, it was really, there was no real, the main issue was not the chemistry between the boy and the girl. The main issue was, do you love me? No, there was none of that, right? It was all about, are these two families compatible? Are the boy and girl compatible? And how much is each side contributing towards the matrimonial home? And that was the responsibility of the Shadchan to negotiate that deal. And so the maschil is a person who starts the negotiation process, and the closer is the one who seals the deal. And he writes, "Ve'emtzoi lo yikach klum." And if there's a third Shadchan in the middle, like he's neither the opener nor the closer, he gets nothing. Aval ra'isi noagim shemechalkim legimel chalakim, shlish lamaschil, ushlish laemtzoi, ushlish lahagomer. But then the Ateres Tzvi says, but there are other places where the minhag is that if there are three Shadchanim, the opener, the middleman, and the closer, then all three split it three ways evenly. Okay? V'haba'olim yanichu hashadchanas beveistin, v'achar kach ne'emanim lomar mi hamaschil u'mi ha'emtzoi u'mi ha'goimer, v'yagidu b'cherem, v'im echad mehen karov ha'pasol yagid sad hasheni, v'im shenit shnei atzadim hem psulim, ein emanim ela b'shvua v'chulei. He says basically the way it works is the families will leave the Shadchanas money in the hands of the Beis Din, and the Beis Din will allow people to come forward and verify that they are the Shadchanim. What was your role? They'll take down the names, and based on the testimony of the two families, they'll verify how many parties were involved in making the shidduch, and the Beis Din will dole out the money accordingly. Ein lahakrovim klum b'shadchanos umashmid ratzalomer sheinosin gam chelkam lahamaschilin. He says, and then there's another halacha, which is that if they started with non-relatives and then relatives got involved in order to seal the deal, then the relatives are not entitled to shadchanas because they're doing so out of a personal interest in the family, because out of trying to help their family member. So only the non-relative is entitled to shadchanas. Ulefi zeh ma shekasav hanoda b'Yehuda hanal v'im echad mehatzadim machnesis krovo ligmor ein lahashadchan harishon shum dinu mishpat klal hainu mitzad adin v'kan mitzad hatakana. So basically, it all depends upon the takana, and I'm just skipping a few lines. Ayin sham od. So he's quoting. This is all according to the Ateres Tzvi. That basically what the Ateres Tzvi has added is that there are different minhagim in different communities as far as how to split the shadchanas. In some communities, only the opener and the closer split the shadchanas 50-50, and they can cut out the middleman or all other middlemen entirely. And in other communities, everyone who was involved in the shidduch gets an equal portion. Va'ayin b'tshuva shev Yaakov siman yud gimel, b'nidon dinu dvarim shahaya be'esek shadchanas bein hamaschol v'gomrin. He says he had to preside over a case of where there was an opener shadchan and a closer shadchan. Ve'heshiv davazet talya b'minag hamedinos, and he said that it all depends on what the convention of the community is. He says, "Va'ani kasher ra'isi haminhag be'ir moladati kila kadosha Prague litain lahamaschil chelik shlish Ke nahagti po b'medina zu. He says, in Prague, they used to give the opener 1/3 of the fee. And if he was only an opener for one family and not for both families, he's only entitled to 1/6 of the Shadchanis fee, which is half of a third. Besirsur, the dafke b'haya ramos of all be'ein ramos b'davar mashalo nikmal yidei amaschel b'nigmar al yidei acher ein la maschel klum nirali lechalek binyan amaschel kasher kvar pasakti kama pe'amim. He says that it all depends on the circumstances. There is a case that is brought by the Beis Yosef that the opener gets nothing, but that's only where you can ascertain that the person who did the opening was not competent to be able to contribute anything towards the deal. But in a situation like this, where the first Shadchan really did contribute something substantive to the closing of the deal, so then he gets 1/3 and the closer gets 2/3. Also, tzad shehaya merutza lashidach mamid acherim asher divrem nishmam yosu letzad hasheni hein yado hein al yedei shum grama bevadai deyesh lo din maschil v'zeh haklal ba'ofen she'efshar lomar ilulei shehaya zeh hamaschil asher his'or lazeh lahaya ola al das acherim lidvar shidur chalaz. So he says, but in a situation, he says, listen, it could be the opener was not capable of brokering a deal between the two families. But had he not suggested the whole deal in the first place, it never would have happened. In other words, it wasn't something that the two families on their own would have thought of, and no other Shadchan brought the deal between the two families. Let's say, one is from Minsk and one is from Pinsk, and they don't know each other. And this guy happens to lives in Minsk, but happened to travel to Pinsk, and he met the kid, and he says, this would be a great shidduch for the girl that I know in Minsk. So he's the one who puts the whole deal together. But then the two sides realize he's not the right guy to broker the deal because he doesn't really know the families in Pinsk, and they get the families, friends in Pinsk involved, and they're the ones who close the deal. So then he's certainly entitled, the opener is certainly entitled to his sarsirus because nothing would have happened without his initial idea. And therefore, in Kain vaday mechuyev litin lamasla kefi aminag, etc., etc., etc. Okay. Okay. I want to skip to a beautiful proof that he brings from the Chumash. He says, "V'raya lechiluk zu migemara sof perakama desota." Is it what? It's in this week's parsha. I want to bring a raya from this week's parsha that there's a Gemara in the first chapter of Sota that says the Isa Hasam Ksiv Vayikach Moshe es Atzmos Yosef Imo Uchasiv es Atzmos Yosef Asher Helu Bnei Yisrael Mitzrayim Kavru Bishchem. We have a stira in Psukim. The pasuk in Parshas Beshalach says that Moshe was the one who took Yosef's remains out of Egypt, but the pasuk in Yehoshua seems to say that Bnei Yisrael collectively took Yosef's remains out of Egypt. Which one was it? Was it just Moshe, or was it Gans Bnei Yisrael? Amar Rebbi Chama b'Rebbi Chanina, Kol had osa davar v'lo gamro uba acher v'gamro, ma'ale alav hakasav al shegamro ki'ilu asa'o. So Rebbi Chama says it's not a stira. In other words, really, Moshe only took Yosef's remains out of Egypt, but he didn't fulfill the shlichus that Yosef had commanded, which was, bring my remains to Eretz Yisrael and bury me there. And because Bnei Yisrael did that and not Moshe, they are credited with having taken Yosef out of Egypt. Even though they didn't, but anyone who's a closer is credited with doing the whole job. The kasha al zeh mi medrash Yalka Tehillim, Mizmor Shir Chanukas Habayis LeDavid, v'chi David beno avalo Shlomo beno. You have an opposing medrash, which says that we say this kapitel, Mizmor Shir Chanukas Habayis LeDavid, that King David is the one who built the base Hamikdash. But 1 second says the midrash, v'chi David beno halo Shlomo beno. David didn't build the base Hamikdash, Shlomo built it. Ela Omar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ho'ol v'chashavta livnoso v'chule. See, he says, and God says, because David, you started the process and you wanted to build it, I give you the credit as if you built the whole thing. So it's direct stira between these two midrashim. One midrash seems to say that the person who finishes the job, even if they didn't start it, is credited with the whole job. And another midrash says that the person who started the work, David, even though he never got past digging the foundations, is credited with building the whole thing. So which one is it? Is it the opener or the closer? So va'alpi chiluk hanal asi shaper degabe atzmos Yosef below haschala de Moshe hayagam ken yiskayim bevadei osa mitzvah yedei acher mishum hashvua. He says, in the case of Moshe taking out the remains of Yosef, had Moshe not himself attended to the remains of Yosef, they would have figured out someone else in Bnei Israel would have done it, because but rather rak the amru hanichalo kvodo bigdolim kidi isahasam. But as the Gemara implies, when everyone else saw that Moshe wanted to take Yosef's remains, they said, give him the kavod. But if Moshe hadn't done it himself, the rest of Bnei Israel would have done it. L'chei nikra al shem hagomer, kiven de ilav shekodam hamaschil hayagomer nami maschil. Ma she'en kein bevinyan beis hamikdash delo nikva zman kavu lebinyan v'ilav de hisorer David efshelo hayim hisorer melech acher kemoshelo hisorer shol l'chei nikra al shemo. He says, but in the case of David, had David not been inspired to begin the process of the Beis HaMikdash, it never would have gotten off the ground. And so that's why David as the opener is credited. With Atzmos Yosef, Moshe is not credited, because if he hadn't done it, someone else would have done it. So he wasn't necessary for the deal to go through. But in the case of David, it's the temple is as if it's built by David because he started the process, and if it were not for his initiative, it wouldn't have started. Umizer raya linidon didan bedin hamaschel b'Shadchanus, dim hamaschel haya hamamsi ledavar, vilav hamtsaso efshad lo hayu hagomrim maski adaitayu, vaday ro'i lo schar hamaschel al kol panim ad kan devorav ayin sham. And that's the concluding line, says the Pischei Tshuva. He says that's our proof that if the opening Shadchan is the one who initiates the idea, he certainly is entitled to his chelek, because if it were not for him, the shidduch would not have ever gotten started. No, he's not prepared. He only gets a third, is what he had said. Well, it's. I don't think you can say David got the full amount. It doesn't say throughout Tanakh that this was David's mikdash. It's at the end of the day, it's Binyan Shlomo, right? But at least, yeah. Okay, we'll conclude Mirz Hashem next week, but this is part one of the laws of Shadchanis. The bottom line is when there are multiple Shadchanim, as if the first Shadchan plays a vital role of initiating the process, and that without that Shadchan, things would probably not have gotten off the ground to begin with. The first Shadchan is at least entitled to a significant chelek of the Shadchan.